belongs to us the people that inhabit it.
Sustainability, global warming, climate change, climate breakdown, CO2 and plastic pollution, whatever the term used to describe the detrimental impact humans are having on the planet, the public is becoming increasingly aware of and concerned with the issue. Welcome to Telltale Stories. My name is Alexandra Clark. I'm the founder of Telltale Research, and this is Telltale Stories, a series of topical reflections and interviews with experts. This episode is going to be about climate change, and our expert today is sustainability facilitator Susannah Raff. So welcome and thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
So to start with, do you mind just telling us a little bit about your background and who you are?
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name, as you said, is Susannah Raff. I'm from Australia, as you can probably hear from my accent. I moved to London about a year ago. My background is in sustainability and social issues, and I've sort of worked, studied, volunteered in that space for over 15 years, and more recently have been working on climate conversations.
I want to talk a little bit about why it's important to talk about climate change. So for those who are less familiar with the topic, would you be able to give us just a brief outline of the key issues that concerns you the most?
Earth very uniquely has an atmosphere that keeps it at this perfect temperature for sustaining life. And there are material sort of elements in our atmosphere that help that, like CO2, that keeps the planet at a nice, comfortable, warm temperature. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we would be freezing, a freezing rock in the middle of space. But as we add more CO2, it's like adding another blanket, and it just traps the heat more and more, and so it increases temperature. But that in itself doesn't mean anything. It's warmer, so what? But what that means for the climate is that you have melting ice caps, which means sea level rise. You have increased ocean warming. You have increased storm events, so weather gets more intense. You have pockets of desert and pockets of flooding, and you have shifting climatic zones, which causes a lot of species extinction and can cause ecosystem collapse. And we depend very much on these ecosystems for food systems, for maintaining oxygen in the atmosphere through forests and things like that. So climate change. Sorry, go on.
So in reality, it's quite a fragile ecosystem.
It is. It's called the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah.
And the fact that Earth is the only planet we know that has this atmosphere that keeps us safe, that can sustain life, but it is quite fragile. And you might hear on the news about 1.5 or 2 degrees, and it doesn't sound like much, but there's only a 5-degree difference between now and the last ice age, and that's a very dramatic difference. So we're not talking about just a couple of extra hot days. It's a total change in the climate.
And so why is it particularly important to talk about right now?
So last week, the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out. And that fairly explicitly said we have about a decade left to act. It's really that urgent. We're on track for, remember I said about the 5 degrees difference between us and now and the last ice age. We're on track to reach 3 to 4 degrees warming by the end of the century. So this is getting serious. And this report says that really the last decade or so to act is now. So this is why it's so important now. We've been dragging our feet for so long. We've known about we've known about the greenhouse effect since about the late 1800s. There's been campaigns about global warming since 60s and 70s. So this is not new science, and it's not a new topic, but because of economic and political powers, it's been dragged out, and now it's urgent, and now we need drastic action. Unfortunately, we've missed our window for gradual incremental change, and now it has to be drastic change. but we need to bring everyone on board with that. So.
Yes. And what would you say, just briefly, are the main causes of the environment heating up?
So fossil fuel usage, so the burning of fossil fuels, which generates carbon dioxide, is a major contributor, which is why global warming and climate change is an issue of the post-industrial era. Mm-hmm. So before the Industrial Revolution, it wasn't necessarily going to be a problem. Mm-hmm. But then you have the Industrial Revolution, you have the exploitation of fossil fuels, and suddenly it's a problem. There's also a problem of deforestation, so at the same time as burning lots of fossil fuels, we're cutting down forests, and forests absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen. Yeah. So that's our balance, and we're removing the balance and increasing the supply. So those are the two sort of, at a very basic level. There's lots of different details about industries that cause that, and agriculture is a major issue as well.
So in the UK, there's recently been an increased public focus on climate change, such as from David Attenborough's series, and to the charge of plastic bags and recycling bins. These are the little things that people notice when they're otherwise not particularly aware of other facts that scientists are putting out there. So it seems to be becoming more of a topic that has raised awareness in people's consciousness. But on the other hand, we've got on the international political scene leaders emerging such as Donald Trump, who are climate change deniers. And the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, is another denier who perhaps gets less media attention, but who's nonetheless just as bad. So I just had a quick look at his profile and read that among other things he mentioned in 2017, he accused those concerned about the environmental impact of the coal industry of having a, quote, ideological, pathological fear of coal. So kind of a quite extreme stance he's taking. And what are your sort of thoughts on those recent political movements that are at the other extreme?
Yeah, I mean, like anything like that, and with Trump, Brexit, all these things, the root causes have been a long time coming and a long time brewing. It's harder for me to comment on Trump in the United States, but in Australia we have a very long history of well, first of all, we're a very minerals rich country. We have lots of coal reserves that if climate change was not a problem, we could supply coal to the world for 500 years. We've got lots of it. We sort of rode out the global financial crisis and weren't terribly hit by it very badly because of our mining industry and things like that. So that's very strong and powerful in Australia, and there's this revolving door between politicians and the minerals industry. So you've got people who used to work in the mining sector and the fossil fuel sector that then come into politics, and vice versa. The people from politics then, through the political lobbying, they form relationships with people in the fossil fuel industry, or maybe they went to high school with them, or university, and then they go after their political career into the minerals industry. The same is similar in the United States. One of Trump's first appointments was Rex Tillerson, who's the head of ExxonMobil for a very long time. So there is this unseen influence from the fossil fuel industry on governments and political figures. And because that's been happening for such a long time, it's really become very embedded, and it's very hard to break out of that. So I'm glad you brought up Scott Morrison. It's a very difficult topic in Australia, climate change, because we have a Prime Minister who has said this. Our previous Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, said coal is good for humanity. And and it's just this refusal to acknowledge science because of whatever story that they've been told and have been telling themselves throughout their lives, and within the party itself and the political landscape. It's a very difficult issue to unpick, but that's sort of some of the background to that.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the thing, as just a normal citizen, you're up against these huge financial powers and political powers that you can sometimes feel like you don't really know what you can do, and that's why I wanted to then bring the conversation back to what we actually can do. So tell me a little bit about what you would do. Say, first of all, what are the things you would change in society, and then what you think you can do as an individual.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, those two questions really need to be interlinked, because so for myself as an individual, and the question in reverse, as an individual, I do, I recycle, I have my coffee cup, I turn off the lights, I do all of these little actions. I know they don't amount to much, but it keeps me connected with my values, and it keeps me connected with the movement as a whole. But it's not enough, and so we do need that more broader social movement, a society-wide scale of action, and that comes from connecting up with other people to take that action. Australia, as well as the UK, and supposedly the United States, we live in a democracy, and while our leaders are ignoring the issue or actively denying it, they are actually beholden to us, the people. So a revitalisation of democracy is really important here, because while we can take actions at a local level, and lots of, I should mention local governments, local councils and city governments are making great strides. I think it was Bristol that just declared that they are committed to being carbon neutral by 2030. So cities like that are really taking action at the local level, but we also need our national governments and our leaders to not only be taking action, but sending the message to the rest of the population that this is an issue and that we take it seriously. And it's a moral issue, it's not just a technical problem that can be fixed.
Increasing the awareness, so it's something that becomes important to people when they do elect the next party, and whenever they make decisions in life that does make a difference. That seems to be step number one to some extent. That's one of the things that we've struggled with, I guess, in climate communication, is that there seems to be, from focus groups that I've run, there's simultaneously too much information and not enough information. So in this day and age, it's really difficult to know who to believe, who to trust, and so it's much easier to just stay out of it, leave it to somebody else. But the more conversations you can have with people who they trust, rather than just trying to filter the news from websites, from Facebook, from social media, and figure out which one is real and which one is not. It's much more effective to have those conversations with people you trust, and learn together. Another thing is also making it easier for people to make the right choice, so that when they go to the supermarket, for instance, they don't need to think through the whole climate situation when they just want to pick up, I don't know, a bottle of milk. So if it becomes a social action, even when it comes to businesses providing more sustainable packaging options and all of those things that collectively help to make the individual make the right choice.
What we currently do is we put all of the responsibility on the consumer, for them to try and make the right choice at the end. And as you said, you just want to buy some milk. how do you go and research who owns the company of the brand of milk that you're buying, and who owns that company, and what are they doing, and are they contributing to climate denial? Are they, it's really complicated, and it's not fair to put it all on the consumer at the end. But at the same time, as citizens, we need to put pressure on businesses and government to regulate businesses to be able to make those choices, the social norms, the business normal. We as citizens give that social license to businesses to operate. And so we need to exercise that and say, no, this is unacceptable. But we also need the government to help us with that.
So what would you say are the sort of main advice you'd give to the normal citizen who wants to make a difference but is not quite sure about how to go about making those differences?
So first of all, get informed. It's really difficult, as I said, to navigate all of that information, but finding a starting point. In the UK, there's 1010, so one of the climate organisations. Climate Outreach also have a lot of really accessible information about climate change. Raising the topic with your friends and families to see how they feel about it, if they're concerned about it. They might have information as well that they've learnt along the way that you can share. So one thing is to get informed. Also, make sure your vote counts. Writing a letter to your local MP, your local representative, to say, I want you to take action on climate change. This is important, and I will vote based on policies on climate change. So writing to politicians, even calling them on the phone.
One thing that struck me is, say, if you are going to contact your local MP or you're going to talk with your bank about this issue, you need a certain level of confidence and an ability to actually talk about these complicated issues, and within that, again, it's going back to that sort of increased awareness, and that's perhaps something that is part of what you're doing, just opening up the discussion and perhaps helping people with sifting through some of those facts and giving them some easy to understand language that they can then use and take forward.
It's not about having that fact for fact debate head to head, because at that point most of us are excluded, because that's a very difficult conversation to have unless you are a climate scientist and have skills in debating at the same time. They're very specialist skills. So this is not about making us all into expert debaters or expert climate scientists, but just recognising that we are all citizens of the UK, of Australia, but we're all citizens of planet Earth, and we should have that ability, that right to speak up and say, this is important and we need to do something together about it.
Last week I listened to a podcast from The Guardian called Today in Focus, and that was an episode that was called The Plastics Conspiracy, Who is to Blame for the Waste Crisis? And in it they mentioned the Extinction Rebellion, a group of climate change protesters who've recently been demonstrating around London. And they claim that civil disobedience is the only way to get attention. What are your thoughts on that?
Civil disobedience has always been an important factor in every social movement throughout history. It was what Gandhi promoted as well, peaceful civil disobedience. So non-violent direct action is also another word for it. And the suffragettes did it. They chained themselves to things just to be noticed, because who notices women in that time? And so that is really important. I do agree with them on that. They are a new group, so I'm yet to sort of get a feel for their tactics. I think in the past, because of past movements, the idea of civil disobedience can seem destructive, but actually it can be really creative as well.
And just a small thing that catches the media's attention, and then your message is out there.
And then you snowball and other people get involved, and you can have sit-ins, and all you're doing is just sitting, occupying a space to bring attention to the issue and saying, we've had enough.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
It's super interesting.